he'd read my manuscript and he gave me feedback, and I basically editorial feedback, and I read his feedback, and I basically edited the book, and it was great. Actually, it was a way for us to see if we could work together. You know.
Welcome to the Sandy Adams Show, the podcast where we dive into life, business, and everything in between. I'm your host, here to bring you inspiring stories and valuable insights from amazing individuals who are making a difference in their fields. Whether you're looking for career advice or entrepreneurial tips or just a dose of inspiration, you're in the right place. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome to the show author Kelly Garrett. She's based in Portland, Oregon. Kelly's debut young adult mystery, The Last to Die, was a 2018 Oregon Book Award finalist. Writing under the pen name Emmeline Duncan, she's the author of the Ground Rules mystery series, with the latest release, Death Unfiltered, released earlier this year. Now she has an exciting new series on the way with the first book, Chaos, at the Lazy Bones Bookshop, set to arrive in August 2024. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sandy. It was really fun because we met in a very unique way of
Yes, we
emails
did.
gone astray. So it's really fun to be here.
I know. And, you were such a good sport about it. So, for all of you out there, I have another podcast and the fifth quarter, and I was booking Garrett Kelly for that podcast. And anyway, I messed up his email quite by accident. Apparently, a lot of people do. And it went to you. And you're not the first one. Like, this is not the first email mix up for you to get.
Mhm.
So you were great. And I love the fact that you went like I saw your Twitter, like you went to Twitter and you tagged the podcast and you tagged Garrett and said, I think this was meant for you. And I'm like, oh my God, how did she get that? And then I saw your name and I went and looked up, and that's when I saw your email. But you were such a good sport about that, because some people, especially if it happens like, over and over, would be like, get it straight, dude. Like, really.
Well, thankfully, it hasn't happened. I mean, it's happened regularly, but it's not like every week or every month.
Right.
And
Right.
it's kind of been funny. I've had people email about jobs before, and one of the funniest to me, I responded back like, "You have the wrong person," meaning you have the wrong email. And I got a
Right.
pep talk in response of like, "No, you'd be perfect for this job. You're absolutely the right person." And so I responded back, "Wait, let's start over."
Yes.
I live in Oregon. And I'm a woman in Oregon that does not coach basketball. And he
That's
was
right.
like, "Oh, let me." But also the fun part, because the Garrett was ended up on the emails with us, and then I realized I've been getting his phone bill, and so I was able to forward that and be like, I
Oh, the email. They're emailing his phone bill to you too. Okay,
yeah,
that's really
yeah,
funny.
because it's funny. There's a different Garrett Kelly. I get a lot of his like medical stuff, and I try replying to places when I can. I mean,
Right.
some of it when it's clearly automated, I ignore, but when it's also clearly personal, like someone reaching
Right.
out for like a podcast, I'm like, it doesn't cost me anything to
Right.
spend a minute and be like, oh, you have the wrong email address. It's
And
just
in
respectful.
and in this case, you got a new reader out of this, because I immediately that's what we're talking before we got on. I immediately went and looked up. Okay, I have to say, in your bios and everything it says YA, and I'm like, what is a YA book? And then I realized, oh, it's young adult. Like, it took me a second to get that, but I immediately went and looked it up and immediately started reading. I've already read the first two books in your Ground Rules mystery series. And I want to start there really quickly, because before I forget it, because it's actually not on my notes, I don't think. I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I walk and I like to multitask and I drive a lot. So I'm always looking for something to kind of cut my brain off from work, and something that's interesting, but not doesn't it's not like, rocket science where I have to like think really hard. And for me, I'll start an audiobook, and if the person reading it is not quite right, I don't listen to the book. Like, I can't do it. And what I immediate loved about yours were two things. One, the lady that read it was perfect. Like, her voice and everything was perfect for the book. But number two, you write dialogue really well. Because I've listened to some books where they're probably not written for audio,
Mhm.
and yours, like, it was just it caught my attention, and it was just written really well. in the terms of dialogue and me knowing who's talking and all that kind of stuff. So let's just kind of start with there and about, you were telling me the process for an audiobook is a little bit different because you signed the rights away, or you sold the rights.
Sold the rights.
Yes.
Yeah. So anytime you sell a book, and well, I should mention a lot of my answers will be very focused on traditional publishing, which is where, I mean, I have a literary agent and I sign my books to a place that, paid me in advance.
Right.
It can be some of my answers would be different if I was like self-publishing, so there's
Right.
like some differences there. So for me, like when I sold like the rights to my book to Kensington to come out, there's different sub-rights that you can hold, meaning that like the author keeps, or there's some that the publisher might want to share in. And so like translation rights are something that like I hold 100%. But the one thing my publisher wanted to keep was a split on audiobooks, which was
Hmm.
fine. I mean, that's really normal. And so it was great. They then sold the audio rights, or licensed, would be the better term,
Right.
to Tantor, which is one of the biggest audiobook companies in I think the world, definitely in the country. And Tantor then takes care of all of the part that really makes the audiobook part shine. They
Yes.
hire the actors and actresses. And in my case, Carly, I believe, does work on Broadway. And I mean, she's a member of the Screen Actors Guild. She's a very accomplished actor, does a lot of audiobooks, so she really knows what she's doing. And they have, then the professional, sound booths and everything that makes that, quality audiobook
Right.
process. And it's fun because, I mean, not every book gets acquired for audio. So I assume the um, acquiring editors for that look at the books they think will translate well,
Yeah.
to voice. Because if it's something that's really like avant-garde, where there's like 3 sentences on a page, you probably wouldn't get that impact like on an audiobook. Where, like a cozy mystery, like what I write, that's a great one for an audiobook because it's a great thing to like listen to while you're going on for a walk or doing dishes or like housework. And so, and it's they're fun mysteries that they're engaging, but it's not like reading like a heavy nonfiction book where you really
Right.
want to keep details
Right.
in mind.
And I loved because it's not it there's not really any gore in it. I mean, it's really like it's easy. It's easy to listen to, but it's also interesting and it keeps your attention. So I'm very much looking forward to reading the next two books in that series.
One thing that's fun about the style of mysteries I write, so if you look in like mystery as like a genre,
Hmm.
there's different kind of categories within it, right? So there's like noir, which is like the really dark. My favorite description of noir is that the main character starts out screwed and ends up screweder, right? And those are the ones that are like they're usually very depressing, right? And then
Yes.
there's like hard-boiled mysteries, which are your classic like Dashiell Hammett and Ray Chandler, and there's also like detective noir. And then on like one of the flip sides is like cozy mysteries, which people will compare it to like Agatha Christie or Murder She Wrote,
Right.
and they tend to have like no gore, like minimal gore on the page, minimal language, minimal sexual content. It's very much about solving the puzzle who did it, but the
Right.
puzzle is always based on the community the characters live in, right? And so usually something happens that throws the community off base, off balance, because like usually the murder, in mine it's like a Brista who basically
Right.
solves that mystery, but also brings kind of balance back to the world she's in. And cozies are fun. They don't exclusively have women narrators, but they frequently have female narrators. So
No, that's really great because for me, I go through, you know, for me, I do a lot of mental work. I do social media and things like that. And my mind is like stressed all day long. And so what I do is when I go and walk, I look for something that is not about what I do for a living and something that doesn't require me to think a lot, but it also like gets me to want to go walk because I was really trying to only listen to the audiobooks when I walk as an incentive to keep walking. But anyway, enough about my walking. One of the things that when we were going back and forth in email, I want to bring this up really quickly, was I'm typing out and I realized your name is Kelly Garrett, and I grew up with Charlie's Angels. And I was like, oh my God, you're like one of the angels. And Kelly was actually the angel that stayed throughout the entire series.
yeah, Jacqueline Smith was the only actress
Yes.
that was in every season.
Yeah.
And it was fun. My parents had no idea. Um, they didn't realize that the character's name was Kelly Garrett on the show. And it's funny because sometimes people growing up, they would know Charlie's Angels immediately to this day. There are people that are like Charlie's Angels and other people who didn't. But it's really fun. And it also was nice because, one thing that anyone that starts, like selling a product like a book is, you should really Google your name and see what comes up. And honestly, having Charlie's Angels show up is not a bad thing, right? Like I know someone that shared a name with someone who was notorious for a not good reason,
Yes.
right? She was like, "Oh no."
That's something because I teach a lot of job search and career strategy classes, and that's one of the things that I do talk about is everyone should go and Google their name just so they can see what comes up if because somebody is going if they meet you, they're probably going to Google you in some form or fashion. And it is important to know what comes up. But yeah, it can actually work in your favor and can also not. So let's talk about how did you actually get started writing, like in general?
Well, writing is the one thing I've always wanted to do. And so even as a kid, even before I like knew how to write, I would draw pictures with elaborate for a 4-year-old right story behind them. And then it's really fun. I can say I actually won my first literary contest at age 8. The school I was in, I had entered like a short story and got to go to this like all day children's like little writing workshop. And so it's always been what I've been really interested in. In Oregon, I would participate in the Oregon Writers Festival, which is a festival for kids in multiple years. As a teen, studied creative writing and political science in college, although amusingly, political science was probably more useful, which is pretty hilarious. And then, I mean, I worked in like marketing communications and some sort of admin stuff as I was, but what I wanted always to do was write. And so then I was just writing on the side and wrote my first manuscript, which I didn't query it very widely. The first that I tried to sell, I tried to get an agent with it, but I didn't try that hard. I did,
Right.
I got multiple requests off like 30 queries, kind of the same with the next book. And I think I had an internal sense that while I was proud of those books, I realized they maybe weren't ready yet.
Right.
And then my third book, which came as my debut young adult novel, it queried really well. Had a lot of people, a lot of agents asked for pages, but no one actually signed that book. But I did when I was kind of hitting a dead end with it. I submitted it to a small publisher that specialized in young adult mysteries, and they actually acquired it. And at the same time, I had written my first mystery for adults,
Mhm.
and I had queried agents like that repped that category. And that was actually when I ended up signing with my agent, like not long after I sold the Last to Die. And it's sort of amusing. So Last to Die came out, and then a year and a half later, the publisher I was with, the smaller publisher, was bought out by a bigger publisher who reissued The Last to Die. And so
Oh,
if you look up, there's like two different covers on it. And the reissue actually was in Target stores across the nation, like right when the pandemic hit. It was a very weird situation.
but a very,
And
I think, a good situation
no,
then.
a wonderful situation for
Yeah.
me, but very strange. It was a very weird path for the book. But so meanwhile, like because I'd signed my first book for adults with my agent, and then that book went out on submission. It didn't sell. But then I was writing Fresh Food Murder, the first in my Ground Rules mystery series, and that did sell. Although I actually wrote one version, I read about the first 30,000 words and sent it to my agent. He didn't like it at all, but I realized his feedback was really good. And so I basically threw those 30,000 words out and started over. And then that was the version that we sold.
Okay. So, you do write under two different names.
Mhm.
What was the purpose in that? Was it just to distinguish between the two different genres, or
Well,
what was
it does duty in a couple ways. One is it definitely does separate between the genres as far as what
Mhm.
I write because they are very different. But there's also so my debut came out in 2017, in April 2017, and later that year, another Kelly Garrett had her debut come out, and she wrote for adults. And she spells her name slightly different, but it was definitely it's still confusing. Where people even writing under a pen name, people like at writing at conventions will come up like the other Kelly and be like, "Oh, I didn't know you wrote under another name," and she's like, "That's not me." And I get email for her as well, and
We should just have one big club there.
exactly.
Um, so how did you come up with the name Emmeline Duncan?
Oh, Emmeline Duncan was my third great grandmother. And so
Oh,
I pulled it off my family tree. I thought that was nice. It felt authentic. And also the domain name emmelineDuncan.com was available.
right.
Social media handles were easy to get.
Yeah.
So it
Um,
was
Irish ancestry or
yeah,
Scottish?
Irish and Scottish. It's funny, my father's side of the family was basically like British Isles, and my
Mhm.
mother's side is Nordic. So it's like
Okay.
basically all like Northwest Europe.
Mine is kind of also my mom's side really is what I've done the most research on, and it goes back to Scotland. I don't really claim the British part of it because I'm more excited about the Scottish part of it. But yeah, okay. So now let's dive into where did you the Ground Rules mystery series? Like, where did you come up with that whole concept?
Well, I knew I wanted to write something that was very Portland because I really wanted to show that the Portland
Mhm.
that I live in the middle of and I love. And for a while, for a period of time, there was actually in Portland we have a lot of food cart pods, which is it used to especially be like an empty lot where the person that owned it would rent the space out to food carts, and they would come and develop their own little community with with food. And there was one, it was about 3/4 of a mile from my house. That I had a black lab, and we would go there often because there was a coffee cart, Ole Latte, and I would go get nice coffee. My dog would get a biscuit. I mean, to this day, if I see the owner, he'll talk about how he knew I was coming. So my dog was a very happy barker, and he would hear him like a block away. And my dog would run up and put his paws on the order window and get
Oh
his
my
biscuit.
God. Oh my God. I love that.
And as I got to know Todd and some of the other food carts, I realized they were a small community in in the midst of a bigger city. And a lot of cozy mysteries are set in small communities. And I knew didn't want to do mine in that book in a small town, but it was a way to create that community feel within a city.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And it's I love the fact that it made me want to go and find a coffee food truck thing. Like it made me want to. In Memphis, we do have some food trucks. They don't necessarily have one place, I don't think, to congregate. Because I actually lived in Houston for 16 years. So I just moved back to the Memphis area during the pandemic. But yeah, it made me like it gave me right. It's like a cozy mystery. It gave me that feeling that I wanted to go and just have a cup of coffee and just kind of talk with everybody. Much like a small town, when you go into restaurants in a really small town. How did we talked about your agent. You mentioned that. How did you go about finding that agent?
I did a very traditional way. It's called querying, and it's sending out, it's almost like a sales letter where you talk about your book, that your manuscript that you want the agent to represent. And I technically had met my agent at a writing conference. We chatted at the cocktail hour for a few minutes. We talked about mass transit. We didn't even talk about books. So I did mention that in my opening, right? So that book that didn't sell was it was set like in like a craft brewery. And so I told him, like, I mean, I started out the letter by saying, like, when we met, we talked about something that Oregonians are passionate about, transit, and this book is about something else we're passionate about. Well, I wrote it better than that. And and like coffee and beer. And so he read it, and he asked and eventually asked for the manuscript. And I did what's called a revise and resubmit, where he'd read my manuscript and he gave me feedback, and I basically editorial feedback, and I read his feedback, and I basically edited the book. And it was great, actually. It was a way for us to see if we could work together. And I
Sure.
loved his feedback. Yeah, and then he liked that book. He liked it, and he signed me. And like I said, that manuscript didn't sell, although we still have hope maybe someday, like, especially now that I've written some other books, maybe I'll go back and revise it and
Right.
sort of see.
For young writers out there, let's talk about because we're going to get into later about the community support for writers that you are involved in. But for any writers out there, maybe in high school or early college, that have hopes of writing a book and they really like to write, what would be three things that you would recommend for them to kind of do first?
Um, I would say check out your local like bookstores and see what events they have, right? Because if they have authors coming in, especially if it's authors that the teen likes, I mean, that's a great way to go and and ask questions, right? When it comes around at the end of the Q&A. And always feel free to ask, like, how did you get your start? Ask those sorts of questions about becoming a writer. And there are a lot of writing organizations out there, and a lot of them would love to have younger members, right? And so depending upon if it's, if you want to write like science fiction, there's Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, and there's for mysteries, there's Sisters in Crime, or like Mystery Writers of America. And a lot of those I would look to see if they have options for young writers. And I would also look at local writing organizations. Like for me, because one of my local organizations is Willamette Writers, and they have a young Willamette Writers version where that is meant for kids. And I mean, also talk to like your local, like your librarians at their school or your local library. They might have some books like on craft and some recommendations, for local programs that might be free for a teen to join.
Right. So throughout this whole experience, because it's been several years,
Mhm.
I would think that it is, as you said, several rejections along the way. How do
Mhm.
you keep yourself like motivated, and how do you keep yourself like every day continuing to write?
Well, one thing that looking back that the kind of one of the value of those rejections is that once you get a book out, actually having those rejections behind you can be useful because no one likes every book, right?
Right.
There are books that are amazing that people will hate. And so having that sort of develop that thick skin, it's actually really useful for when, there are people that might have really good critical comments, or maybe you're like, I have no idea what they're thinking, but you might get like plenty of negative reviews. And so having that strength in yourself that you believe in what you're doing and that you've already weathered some rejection helps a lot. But I would say the biggest thing I tell people is writing is an art, but publishing is a business. You
Mm,
could
it's
be
true.
the best writer in the world, but there might be market reasons why your book doesn't sell. And so it's basically you should never take it personally, but it's always important to look at like do like rejection letters, do they follow a trend?
Hmm.
Right? Because if everyone is saying like I just don't believe this character could exist, well then, maybe they are onto something. Or like oh, I like the character, the pacing was really off. And then you're like, oh, those because that's a pretty actionable thing to fix.
Right.
Yeah. But a lot of it is just you believe in yourself, and you know that rejections don't they're not that's not your self-worth, and so it's good to have other things to also focus on, to not just be obsessed with like selling a book.
Right. In my other podcast, the one that you that you accidentally got invited to, the fifth quarter, it is about, athletes and their retirement and figuring out what value they have next. And one of that I've really found from a lot of the retired athletes is they've really taught their kids to not put all their focus on sports, to have a life outside of what it is their passion is, because you're not always going to have that passion, or that passion may not always work out. And it's always good to have something else to help offset that passion and kind of keep you a little bit more well rounded. Did you ever experience imposter syndrome along this journey?
I think yeah, I have, and every writer I know has, and it's fun, and especially talking with writers I know that have won like big awards, like I don't the feeling never fully goes away. And it is always a weird feeling where I'm like, oh, there are people actually out there reading my book, right? Because in some ways it doesn't feel real. But yeah,
Did
I think that it's inevitable, and I
did it
think it's something you accept.
when we were emailing back and forth, I had already told you I'd read, I think I told you I'd started on your first book.
Mhm.
And did it make you have a feeling then when I said that?
It's always one of the things where I'm like, I hope she doesn't hate it. Like,
I'm one of those people, if I had, I would not have brought it up. Like I'm not, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But no, I give it a thumbs up for that. Let's dive into your writing process now. So what is the process of a new book like from idea to publication? Like let's use the ground rules, the first book. What was that whole process about, coming up with the idea and then the process until the finished product?
one thing that's interesting, and I'll mention this towards the end, is that my process has changed like after selling. So with the first book, I wrote a draft and I sent it to my agent, and I did a few rounds of revision with him before we sent it out to be sold. And in that case, like it went out, we got like the first offer, we had another offer, so we had a couple offers that we weighed before signing, and then my editor had sent me once it was signed, and when the contracts are signed, which is you never start editing with the publisher usually until that happens. Once the contracts were signed, and he sent me some editorial notes, they were pretty light, and I did them, and sent them back, and he accepted the manuscript. And then it went through also what's called copy editing, where there is someone that hasn't read it before that like just looks for errors. And I mean, like for example, the copy editor pointed out in Fresh Food Murder, I had 2 Saturdays in a row. I mean, I had read
Ah.
that book. I have no idea how many times other people had read it, and no one
I
realized like
know.
there's 2 Saturdays, like you know. So yeah, so fix silly things like that. And then in the meanwhile, for book two, because I had a due date for that, I wrote a synopsis to get and And for me, that was about a 3 to 4 page single space document about what was going to happen in book two. And like basically the major plot arc, not all of the middle, not all the small plot arcs, but the
Right.
precisely what the book would look like as a whole. And I sent that to my agent to give me a little bit of feedback. So I revised it. And then he sent the revision to my editor, who then was like, yeah, he approved it. And so that was going to be book two. And so then, I sat down and then wrote book two based off that synopsis. And that's been the same for two, well, 2 through 5, where it's been based off, the book has been based off that synopsis. And I have permission to change it if I need to, as
Right.
long as it still feels like the same book. Like in the second Ground Rules book is set at a music festival. And that's fine. Like I could change like who did it or who died, as long as it still felt like that same book. I hadn't suddenly
Right.
moved it to like they go on a beach vacation to Mexico, where you'd be like, no, that's not anything like what you had said.
How do you come up with those book titles?
I keep a running list of coffee puns, and then
Oh,
every time that a book we get ready, there'll always be a point. I'll send a list of my favorite titles. And so far, the top two, my two favorites for every book has also been my publisher's favorite. And so a lot of times they've had an opinion of like which of the top two is their favorite, which I've gone with. But yeah, I can proudly claim I've titled all my books myself. But it's fun because, like I said, I have like a if I think of a good pun, I'll write it down and then come
mhm.
back and look at it. But it's interesting for my new Halloween series because it's based at a bookshop, a genre bookshop in a town that's like known for being this filming side of a Halloween movie. So everything has a very like a lot of Halloween puns. I realized like none of the puns were like really working, and then I kind of broke away from that. Did Chaos at the Lazy Bones bookshop, so that way it didn't sound like it was going to be a paranormal book.
Right.
And
Right.
so
So, is it a paranormal book or is it
it's
just
it's it's not. It's all about Halloween love. It's based off of St. Helens, Oregon, which is a real town. It's about
Mhm.
20 miles outside of Portland. It was the filming site of the Halloween Town movies. And those
Did
were
not know
really
that. I did
yeah,
not
and
know
those were
that.
really big on Disney Channel, right? Like the late 90s. And there are people that are still huge Halloween Town fans. And it's kind of fun as if you keep going on Highway 30 out like, towards the coast, you end up in Astoria, which was also a filming site for multiple movies, including Goonies.
Yes,
So
yes,
there's
yes,
like
yes.
these. So I was thinking of a couple Oregon towns when I wrote this, but especially St. Helens. I mean, and St. Helens to this day has a huge Halloween festival. It starts the end of September, runs through all of October, and they just get a ton of tourists that are coming because of the Halloween town sites. And also, it was Bella Swan's house was filmed there in Twilight.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And so to this day, right, people go there for that festival and to see the filming sites. And so that was like the basis of the idea. That and they've since moved. There was a bookstore in the Portland area that was like Halloween theme. And so
Mhm.
those were sort of the ideas of just like a bookstore in a town with like a huge Halloween festival. And they've really leaned into that Halloween theme, as the way to attract tourists.
Okay, that's very cool. I've actually been to Portland, but it was 1997. That was
It
quite a bit, quite a ways back there. And I had friends that lived there, and then I spent several days in Portland, and then we drove to the coast, and I saw there's a big, huge rock. Can't think of the name of it. Haystack
is it
Rock.
Hate Rock?
Yes, 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 yes. But yeah, I love Portland. It was gorgeous. So let's dive in. Do you have any rituals or like routines when you are writing?
Well, I don't have like a specific ritual, although one thing I did with one book when I was struggling to focus is I would kind of create a playlist when I was getting ready, right? So it was like a song or two, and it was always the same song or two to just get me into the mood and into
Interesting.
sort of like the theme that I wanted. For me, the biggest thing to do is to carve out time. I do actually organize a couple Shut Up and Writes in Portland, and that's a national nonprofit where they happen all over, and you go someplace, usually a coffee shop. It can be like a library, a few brew pubs do hold them, and you just go and you work for an hour. Like you write quietly. Like there's like 15 minutes of socializing with people that come, and then you like shut up and write for an hour. Some people stay longer, some people leave, and those are my most productive weeks whenever I for writing, or my productive days, because
Right.
going someplace and just with no distractions. And so I'll do that or go to like some local coffee shops. And I kind of know like when I go to that coffee shop, like it's time to work.
Hmm.
So those are my closest thing to rituals.
It's funny when I lived in Houston. we my ex and I had older cars. And so they always had to go to the shop. And when they were in the shop, I actually kind of liked it because they would be in the shop and I'd just wait there. And for me, it's kind of the same way. You're kind of taken out of your home, you're taken out of your environment, and you don't have any distractions or any obligations. And I actually would like set up a little folding table and I would get so much work done. It was, yeah, it was really great. How do you create and develop your characters so that
Well,
they feel authentic and engaging? Like, what is that process like for you?
one thing for me that's very important is I want all of my characters in the book to feel like they could have been the hero of their own like story,
Hmm.
right? Because even though like the Ground Rule series, it's set through Sage's viewpoint, and then
Right.
in the bookstore, it's all set through a character Bailey. But I want to make sure that everyone around them feels like if we had if I had shifted and wrote the story from someone else's point of view, that it would still feel like a real person, not just a bunch of characters that were there to fulfill like the plot,
Got it.
there for plot reasons. And so there's a series of books I like, and there's like the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. There's a whole series. There's of and I'm blanking on the names. I
It's
should
okay.
remember, but they're basically like negative traits and positive traits, and they'll sometimes even talk about like cynicism, right? Would be generally be considered a negative trait, but there are times that that can actually become positive, right? Because if you don't fall someone that's a scammer, right, that's a time when cynicism is actually good. And they also have some just like emotional reaction thesaurus and like places like urban like urban and like rural thesaurus on like what might you see on like a farm. And so I did look at some of that with like, and I'm like the Emotional Wound thesaurus is really interesting because like if you like lost a parent as a child, or if you were the victim of a crime and different things like that, like how does that affect your everyday life after? And so I do think of things like that, like what are the, because everyone has some level of trauma in their background,
Sure.
right? And like how would that change the way someone reacts now? And so I did try to think about it like a deep level so that the character feels very consistent, and hopefully like they feel like a unique person, but that their decisions should feel very logical to who they are, not just like what I want to happen with the plot.
Right. You talked about that emotional thesaurus, and that wasn't even something I'd even thought about. Like, there's a lot more, obviously, then that goes into writing than just sitting down and typing away on a computer, or just
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, this is a story I want to tell. Because, um, and then let's jump into this. So, writing dialogue, was that hard to figure out how to write dialogue so that it's readable and believable?
For me, it felt pretty natural, which is would probably like I would say probably that was lucky to me. But I mean, I also hone that by just always trying to listen to people, right? And listen to what makes
Yeah.
someone unique when they speak. Like one tip I've only played with it a little bit is to like create like a spreadsheet and make like a list of a page for like your character and like what terms do they use, like what slang,
Hmm.
right? So like my character's like a barista, so I might work in occasionally like a coffee reference,
Right.
right? Like tamp down, your anger or something like that, without getting too much because it'd be annoying if it was like every other sentence.
Yeah.
Um, but and then also one thing I'll tell people when I do teach writing is, especially if you struggle with dialogue, but in general, is read the dialogue out loud, right?
Yes.
And listen
Yes.
to it and be like, would someone actually say this?
Hmm.
And
I
it's fun. Okay.
No, no, go ahead.
See, and it's fun with dialogue because you have the opportunity to show a lot of both what's happening plot wise and to show a lot about the characters. So dialogue should do double duty, right? Because what someone says and how they say it, right, tell you a lot about people in general.
Hmm. It will. What I was going to add was the reading it out loud. I do that for a lot of things. If I'm writing, I'll read it out loud just to see if it, because it does. It sounds different when you actually speak it out loud as opposed to reading it in your head. And I can figure out if things sound better or sound worse and change it up. So that's a great idea for those out there that are writing. Um, what is the most challenging part of the whole process of writing? And let's say on a day-to-day basis, what's what's the most challenging on a day-to-day basis writing?
Well, the biggest thing for me now writing a series is I really want to make sure the series feels fresh. I
Hmm.
don't want to feel like I'm just repackaging something from like 2 books ago. I want to
Right.
make it feel like my character's life has continued to evolve. She's changed subtly. and I want to make sure that the plot lines are, still keep the reader. I
Right.
mean, because I think the style of mystery I write, I mean, one reason people read it is to come back because it feels like you're coming and reconnecting with friends you haven't seen for a while.
Yeah, it
So I want to
does.
make sure that's there, right? That that the characters that people know and love will be there to like help them feel like so the reader will feel like they're back in that world. But I also want them to readers to feel like they're getting something new, that it's not just like I said, like a rehash. And then it was definitely interesting for me, going from aspiring to writing under contract. That's a very big switch to
Mm,
suddenly, because but when you're for your first book, you might have spent 5 years writing that. I know people that have written spent longer, people spent shorter times, but you have all of this time to like get exactly how you want it, and then suddenly you're like, oh, it's due in 6 months or like a year, and you're like, oh, it has to be, you
right.
want it ideally to be better. And some of that, I think certain things will start kind of coming naturally, like the more that you write, and your skills hone. And so there are certain things I do have a much better sense that I don't even have to consciously think of like, oh, something needs to up the tension here. And some of that, I think it happens where I can look back and I'm like, oh, good, I've already done some things that I would have had to consciously think about earlier. So at
Mhm.
least that's a little quicker. But then, there's always there'll be like a new problem you have to deal with. Like, oh, did I need to use the word all right 30 times in 3 pages? You're like, why did I do that? Yeah.
Right. Um, when you started writing, this is going to age both of us, I'm sure. When you started writing for your first book, was it handwritten? Was it a typewriter? Was it a computer?
Um, for me, well, obviously as a kid, that was handwritten.
Right.
For
Right.
the stuff that I say even in college, I was typing a lot of my stories, sometimes handwriting, and my novels pretty much been I've been all been on like on a computer.
Right. Is there a special software that you use or
Mhm.
there is?
Yeah, I love a program called Scrivener. It was actually designed
I've
by a
heard of it.
writer.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's designed by a writer who sort of accidentally created a software company. It's really affordable. And it's great because it breaks up writing a novel, but also there's a lot of nonfiction options like built in to it. Like if you want to write a nonfiction book with footnotes, there's some
Right.
like they have some software you can write graphic novel scripts, novels and section short stories, and it's fun because you can write it in Scrivener. They have a unique way you can move chapters and scenes around, but then at the end you can export it to Word, and it's laid out in manuscript traditional format in whatever format you're using.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've looked at that, but then I would be like, okay, I that's not something I'm taking seriously right now, so I'm going to put it off. Because I do want to write a book. I had a dog. Well, I had three of dogs, but back in 2010, went through a little life crisis, and my 1-year-old Rhodesian Ridgeback puppy and I took a 6-week road trip throughout the West, just me and her, and I took over 8,000 photographs and we went through 15 states. And it's something that I've wanted to write, but I keep going back and forth about, is it going to be a photography book? Is it going to be an actual book about the journey and that kind of stuff? Um, so anyway, that's how I found that software. And I still thought it was very fascinating. Let's dive into your career and your brand. So how do you, what are the key strategies that you initially thought about or did you think about with your first book? Did you think about did you get into the marketing aspect of it or anything like that? And then what do you do
Yeah,
today?
yeah. I mean, that was something I had thought about, and like for my young adult book, because I had social media under my name, but I did do a few things where I had like an Instagram that was just very much like I'd used it for some travel photos. I created a specific writer Instagram account, and I created like a writer Facebook page. And I'd already had a Twitter account, and I kind of did both. But especially for like Instagram and for Facebook under my writer account, I thought of like the audience for my book and like what I was posting. Because I was at that point, like I was also writing like a mystery series about beer. So I was, doing research and checking out like brew pubs, and one want to be careful to not make myself look like a lush, but I'm like, if the market is teens, I really don't need to have like a ton of beer content, right? Even if it is like kind of
Right.
more educational or critical, like that doesn't fit the brand, so I put that all into like a separate account. And then when I started writing like for adults with Emmeline Duncan, that was fun because I did get to kind of start that from scratch. And it's interesting being a writer because in a way, your books are a product, but writers are also treated sort of as like the brand or as the product, because
Right.
people will come back to the like think of Stephen King, right? He releases the new book, a ton of fans buy it because it's him now, because he wrote it, right? Not because it's like a part of a series that he's doing, but just because it has his name on it.
Right.
And so it's figuring out a way to, and people like to see like a bit of a personal life with the writer, which can be a little bit weird, right? Because there's elements, you just want to keep personal. You don't necessarily want to put everything out there, especially if you did explode and suddenly had 50,000 followers. Like they
Yeah.
don't need, there's minutiae of your life that you just don't necessarily want to talk about. And so that's been interesting on like what I should post. And it's like for a while I was doing some like interesting Oregon history, which I should probably get back and do. Or for a while, like I was doing like, like opening lines of books that I liked. But I was just trying to think of things that hopefully that people that followed me would enjoy.
Of
And then of course books, content about my books, but not overdoing it, because buy my book posts are really boring, you know. Eh,
when because I started off as a photographer, and for me, what I found was I had 3 dogs at the time, and so I incorporated them a lot in my posts. And strangely enough, I got clients because they were dog lovers. And then they were like liking my dog posts so much that my dogs got their own separate account, because I couldn't post dogs every day on my photography account. So it is difficult balancing that. And, I've had people say, "Oh, I just thought you were a crazy dog lady." And I'm like, well, I am. But it is difficult. So, like, how do you stay true to who you are when you're writing for different audiences?
well, I think you look at sort of like the audience that you're writing for. And so it was really funny when you asked if there's anything I didn't want to talk about. Politics was one of the big ones.
Yeah,
But
me
like
too.
I knew, right? Like I knew writers, in the past, let's say 8 years, there's been a lot of, some political things that people are very, very passionate about. And that's something I think you want to be very strategic, right? Like I would never lie and say that I didn't believe in what I believe. But
Right.
I think there's a good spot to talk about that. And there's spots that like that's not necessarily where it's the right spot to engage in what should be ideally an in-depth conversation.
Mhm.
And so, I think about that, where what boundaries, where I don't want to like hide who I am, but I also don't want to get into stupid social media fights, right?
Right.
Or things like that that aren't really helping anyone.
Yeah, they don't help anything at all, I don't think. Okay, so what advice would you give, like one advice for a young writer on how to create a brand for themselves as a writer?
I like the idea of sitting down and writing, like writing, sit down with a piece of paper and write down like, what are the things you love? What are the things that are in your book? And where do those things connect? Right. And so if like I have a friend of mine, her debut, middle grade, which is target market of 8 to 12 year olds. It involves a cat, and she's a huge cat person,
Right.
And so I'm like, well, what can you do there that's interesting? And she had a roommate with foster kittens, right? So she would sometimes post like foster kittens, and she would sometimes do cat puns, but it's not like all she did.
Right.
But like a little bit of like that content, and I thought it was very fun. Um, and for me, it's like, it's been hard. I think I had like all these ideas, and then the kind of the pandemic hit, and then of like trying to like profile coffee shops and stuff like that. But like because like like I like ideally from like my coffee books, that would be kind of fun content, would be like showing more about the coffee world or tips
Mhm.
of how to like brew stuff at home. For the Halloween book, I mean, I know I'm gonna have a lot of fun posting Halloween content, you know.
Uh, Speaking of the young adult, who do you market to on social media? Are you marketing? Because what is the age level for the age grouping for that young adults book that you
So
have?
for young adults, so mine was 14 and up sometimes. So
Okay.
YA can be 12 and up or 14 and up. But what's interesting is both, well, definitely for middle grade and to an extent with young adult, you're actually marketing to librarians and teachers.
Oh,
And definitely
interesting.
middle grade is also very much librarians and teachers. Those are the people that put books in the hands of children. And
Interesting.
because when if you try to market to teens, you have they're turning over, right?
Mhm.
Every couple years, like they're aging. And some people will stick with those writers that they loved when they were 16, and others will, they'll look at books for adults. And I mean, and there's still plenty of adults that read for teens. So those are people you might sort of market to directly. But to actually reach teens, yeah, you're looking at the people that will, tell a kid this might be something you would like.
I had not thought about that. It's very true. Would you even consider marketing to the parents, or it's really just the teachers and yeah, the
Also
parents too?
parents, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say
Uh,
it's probably on the whole more effective for like, like a librarian, right? Who's going to see hundreds of teens
yeah.
ideally. But yeah, also parents, and definitely some middle grade will definitely, and picture books. Those are, definitely the parents are a huge kind of person that's marketed towards.
Okay, so let's dive into to your community and how you support the writing community. How can aspiring writers get involved in the writing community, or in just anywhere wherever they're located? And I think you touched on that a little bit at the beginning.
Well, there are some really great writing organizations, and depending upon the genre the person writes, either like there's like Horror Writers of America, for people that write horror. There's I know there's some organizations for people that write essays and memoir, and then and then like there's different like for mysteries. Like I know the mystery writing kind of community the best, and there's also Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is huge. And a lot of these organizations, they have chapters that meet around the country. But I know because like mine, I'm actually part of a fully virtual Sisters in Crime chapter. So anyone in the world can join us. If you're just join Sisters in Crime and you can join our chapter. And that's a great way, especially like if you're writing a mystery, if you're writing like a romance, if you're writing for kids, those are a great first place to go, especially because they tend to have a lot of content already created for people selling their first book. So like the first literary conference I went to was for children's writing, and it was incredibly useful. Even as writing for adults, it's still very useful because they had great sessions on like how to write a query letter. And you can learn a lot about what are the norms in publishing, like what should you expect? And because there are scams out there, what to avoid. Right. So like
Right.
a big one in writing is anyone that wants money from you is probably a scam. It's different if you self-publish and you're like hiring an editor because then you have a contract for services. But definitely there are some really sketchy things out there. So you just want to be very aware as a writer and going to those organizations and learning the norms, or it's a great way to start teaching yourself what to expect and not to not be taken advantage of.
Hmm.
And especially the pandemic really pushed a lot of those writing organizations into creating better online content. Because
Right.
before you had to go in person or it's kind of too bad. And now so many have speakers that are fantastic. Everyone from all over like writers, but people that work in publishing, publicists, editors. Now you can find all sorts of interesting talks. And those are incredibly, incredibly useful.
I like to say that, I always try to look for the good in bad things. And for the pandemic, as much as it was horrible, I also believed it connected us in virtual ways more so than we had been. And it has given opportunities to so many people where they probably wouldn't have had those opportunities before if you had to do stuff in person. And, this is one of those things, the ability to get to see workshops and to get to, attend lectures and things like that. There's so many options now. And even though in-person events are back going on, there's still virtual options. Like even today, um, Pete Souza, who was the official photographer for Barack Obama, he was having a free talk today virtually online, put out by some photography association. um, but for all of those organizations that you mentioned, I'll put the links in the show notes so that
Yeah.
anybody out there can find those and hopefully go and join and further your writing career. Let's go into, what is a moment in your career where you felt like you really felt like you'd made it, or you, or maybe you just felt like this was it.
There was a moment I mentioned my young adult book when it got reissued and it was picked up and it was in Target stores. And I walked into like a random Target and it was there with like the 20% off Target thing. And I was like, my career has peaked. Like nothing is going to be like higher than like this moment. Um, so that was definitely when I'm like, that is very weird. And then I realized I should create like a writer's bucket list of things that happened that I didn't know to expect. All right,
Yeah.
like being, having my book in like an ad in like in one of the big like there's a couple different publications like Kirkus and Publishers Weekly and like Library Journal. And like someone sent me a cutout of like my book and an ad in one of them. And I was like, I never knew that would happen. Yeah. So stuff like that, and so like kind of to keep track of little things like that. Or like the first time someone tagged me on social media that I didn't know with my book, like that
Yeah.
was interesting. Or like the book for teen, I had someone email me, she had read it for some, like she had to pick a book for like a writing class and keep a journal.
Hmm.
And she's asked for permission to send me some questions. And she sent me like the most like the cutest, most adorable questions and her reading journal. And so it was really fun because she would stop after every chapter and be like what she thought would happen or stuff like that. And it was very heartwarming to read. And her
That's so
questions
cute.
were really fun, about like, well, what about like homecoming next year? And I'm like, totally not what I was thinking about, but okay.
Okay, that's really cute. That really is. Because you're inspiring them and you're making them also think creatively, and I love the fact that she went that extra mile cuz a lot of people don't do that, to have that writing journal.
I I don't know if I froze or what is going on.
Let's just pause for a second. You are frozen, but I can still hear you. Can you still hear me? Okay. Let me.
I, I think I'm back. I think maybe my wife.
Okay. So, I think that's pretty cool that she took the time to write in the journal. And I mean, I think that's great because a lot of people would never have done that. Yeah.
I think that shows one also that she's 14. So I think you're a lot more willing to like share that as a kid, which I also then very much wanted to respect, right?
Well,
Because
yes. Because that could be a future writer right there. And how you respond to her and encourage her, which is also a lot of responsibility, I would think, too, is, you could devastate her as well.
right, which is the last thing I would ever want to do.
But
Yeah.
I love that fact. I love to hear things like that because it gives me faith that the next generation is not going to let us down, and there's still lots of kids out there that, want to go the extra mile and want to learn and do all kinds of stuff. How has winning awards and fellowships impacted your career?
Like so like receiving because I received an Oregon literary fellowship. It was really nice. It was a really nice just sort of ego bump, right? Of a like of like I said, you shouldn't, as writing, you don't want to look like externally for validation, but it's also nice to get external validation. Although it was sort of funny because I found out I was getting the Oregon Literary Fellowship and it announced like basically with like the same week as my book deal for Fresh Food Murder. And I
Mm.
was like, 2020, this was on January 2020. I'm like, this is gonna be the best year ever. And then the year took a whole turn.
It did. It did.
And the fun thing with the fellowship is it came with a stipend. And so I had planned to try to go do like a really cool writing retreat or something fun. And then the pandemic happened. But I did use it to get like a new wall mounted monitor and some tech
Mhm.
for my office.
So
Yeah.
so let's talk about that tech. You talked about the software. Like, what do you write on? Like, what kind of computer?
Oh, I just have a MacBook Air. I do because I do like to go to coffee shops.
Yeah.
It's like, and I don't need like I don't need like a gaming laptop. Like I
Right.
that's and
Yeah.
I want also, even if I was a gamer, I'd probably still want a separate laptop for writing to keep it separate. And then and it's funny, I mostly write on my laptop, but I do have like a wall mounted monitor and like a one of the Apple like Magic keyboards and like
Mhm.
a Magic mouse so that I can sometimes to mix it up, have it on the wall and just literally change my viewpoint of it for a little bit.
Sure.
It's funny,
Sure.
like in the pandemic, I was great at working at my desk, and now I'm like, I write all over. We have a built-in desk in our kitchen. We had like a wonky window, and we remodeled. We ended up building this really cool desk under it, and coffee shops. And so I'm kind of like just sort of leave a trail of like where I was writing.
Mhm. Um, because I do a lot of writing for social media and stuff, and I because of back issues and stuff, I have a big Mac, and so I stand up. So I'm standing up this whole time doing this, but I can't stand up 8 hours a day. So I'll go back and forth and work with my laptop and sit on the bed and do that way. And I don't know, it kind of, it is a luxury, I think, that we have that ability these days to be able to work in different areas, even different areas of our house. And
Mhm.
and it also kind of keeps me inspired. What do you do to unwind and relax when you're not writing? You mentioned you had a dog.
Oh yeah, I have he's mostly Great Pyrenees, Waylon.
Hmm.
And so yeah, we go well obviously for walks, and he's a very social dog. He loves meeting people. And
Right.
there's a street just a few blocks away with like a bunch of restaurants and stuff, and his favorite thing is to go walk down that street because it's hilarious. People like point at him like I'll see people in restaurants like pointing out the window like look at that dog to their friends. And if people want to say hi to him, he's like, "Oh yes, please." He really, especially, he's a rescue. He especially loves men, which is funny. My lab was a little nervous with men at first, and then Waylon was like first trying to follow random men home before he decided, "Oh no, I do live with you, and you're my person." Um, and so that, and taking him fun places, like I like to hike, and we're about an hour and a half from the beach. So sometimes, like the weekends, like driving out at least for the day, or sometimes going to stay on the Oregon coast is really fun. I knit. Sometimes I knit a lot, and sometimes I just knit a little bit. And that's like one year during the Tour de France, I knitted a bunch of coffee sleeves. They were one of my promo items, and I knit like 100 of them, like watching the Tour de France, which was fun. And yeah, I mean, and like love to meet up with like writer friends. It's funny we spend time writing, and then it's really fun to just sit down and talk to people about writing. But then
Right.
I also do like sports. I'm a huge Portland Timbers fan. And I have season tickets, and I also go to a couple Trailblazers games every
Right.
year. So things like sports, when working out, also working out is probably the best stress relief
That's
as a
why I
writer.
love you. You like sports.
Yeah, cycling, soccer, basketball, football,
Well,
pretty wide interest actually.
Garrett Kelly will appreciate that. I'll make sure to tell him you're a basketball fan too. Um,
Yeah, he actually told me on Twitter once, I think it was last year, one of the assistant coaches of the Blazers was female, a woman, and that just made me happy. I think.
oh, so yeah, and he's a super nice guy, and we like to tease him a lot. He's only been in Memphis. I think this is going on his third year. But yeah, he's a lot of fun. So do you read books outside of your series?
Mhm. Oh, I would say if you talk about pieces of writer advice, it's like if you want to be a writer, you need to be a reader first and to like
Mm,
read voraciously. And so
right.
I read a lot of mysteries and a lot of crime novels, but I try to also mix it up. Like I really sometimes like if I'm in a reading slump, I'll go back to that kind of like 2010-ish urban fantasy with like they always had like those tattoo girl like tax two tattoos on their lower backs because some of those books are just so much fun. And
Right.
so, those are like what I can if I want to get myself out of the slump. And so I just like to read and read widely. It's good to mix some like nonfiction in. I've been a little bad about that recently. But yeah, I mean, I'm always reading. And I think if you an editor said once it was general writing advice, but if you want to read at least 100 to 150 books in the category you're going to write. And I actually think
Wow.
that's really good advice. I don't think you need to keep a specific number, but I think it's so important to know what are like the norms and the standards of the category that you're writing in. Like, what are the tropes? Like, what
Hmm.
are the expectations? Because if you don't know those, like, how are you going to know that your book is fresh
Yeah.
and
Who
that
are
you're
you?
not falling into tropes?
What book are you reading right now?
Um, I started reading The Brass Verdict, which is by Michael Connolly. I just started that yesterday,
Yeah,
and
I've heard it.
the yeah, it's the book, the first season of The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix. It's the book that was based off that.
Hmm. Um, I think I can't remember I've read that one. I think it's on my list to read. I do love that series on Netflix. I'm hoping that they bring it back for another season. Um,
There'll be a third.
oh, excellent. I'm so excited because I really liked it. I don't know if because not every series that's made from books I like, but I really thought it was really well done and really well acted. What was your favorite book as a child? Did you have one?
I was incredibly voracious reader as a child. A lot of times, when people ask me that question, the first thing I think of is Ramona Quimby, age 8. I got that book by Beverly Cleary. I got it on my 8th birthday, and it's the first novel that I can really remember myself like sitting down and reading.
Right.
And it probably was really the book. I mean, I loved books before that, but it was really the one that probably set me onto my journey of reading. So I definitely loved Beverly Cleary as a kid. The Boxcar Children. I just forgot her name. She wrote the Amelia Bedelia books. She also wrote this like Jed, Bill, and Liza series. It was like two brothers and a sister who were solving like kind of mysteries for their family. And those, like, I love like that series as a kid. I mean, I don't know how many times like I read that series. And so yeah, it's a ton. I mean, of course, I read a ton of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys and
Yes,
like
yes.
all of those Bobbie
Strange
twins. I mean,
strange for me. I love to read as a child too. I actually started reading the encyclopedia when I was a child. We lived in a really small town, and I just fell in love with like ancient Egypt, and I read a lot about the encyclopedia and stuff. But the funny, quirky thing about me is I never read Dr. Seuss books until I was actually in my master's program. And I
oh,
asked my mom one year, I was in my master's program. They were making me read, I think, Green Eggs and Ham or something. And I said, "Mom, why did you not ever like give me Dr. Seuss books as a child?" Because I always remember like we'd go to the library and they'd all have the Green Eggs and Ham thing, and I'm like, "What is that?" Like I didn't even know what that was. And she said, "I didn't like Dr. Seuss. I thought he was stupid." And I was like, "Okay." So I just never grew up with that, but I love the Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys. I love Trixie Belden. That was another
mhm.
mystery thing that my sister actually had books, and that's how I got started in those. And then just anything dealing with the Middle East, with ancient Egypt in general, I really, really loved.
Did you
Yeah.
ever read the Amelia Peabody
Yeah.
mysteries by
Oh my God. Yes.
Peter-
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean to scream there. Yes. I love that series. That just combines everything. I love that. So yes, on that too. What do we have to look forward to from you? Because I'm excited.
yeah, well, as you mentioned, the fourth book in my Miss Coffee series, Death Unfiltered, I can show on the screen. That just came
Yes.
out at the end of March, and it's actually I think one of the best books I've ever written. So it makes me very happy that it's out. And then the fifth book in the Ground Rule series comes out next year. And then I also have it at the technically the very end of July. So for August, Chaos of Lazy Bones Bookshop comes out. And that
Yes.
is it's a Halloween themed mystery. And that is the first of at least three book series. And so those are the most immediate things to look forward to from me.
Well, I'm
And and,
excited.
and if you follow me on Instagram, you'll it's coming into the summer season, probably some good dog on the beach pictures.
So
So
your Instagram account, and I'll post all of our social media stuff in the show notes, but what is your Instagram account you would love everybody to follow?
So it's writer Emmeline Duncan, and it's
Okay.
that's both Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then I'm still on Twitter as like Duncan Emmeline, and then I'm also on TikTok as Duncan Emmeline. Although TikTok is I'm not a natural at TikTok. There are people that are
I'm
amazing
not
at it,
either.
and it's
I'm
not
not
really my format. But I do sometimes dog videos. But my most viewed video actually was my dog failing at fetch. So
It's always the animals that like, steal the show from everybody, I think. Okay, so thank you so much for everything that you have shared. I got to say, I love the fact that the wrong email like did this. I mean, I'm always talking to people about the value of networking and just seizing any opportunity that you have, and how, I just realized several years ago that, I love people's stories. I love talking to people. Not everybody wants to talk back to me, but I love like, how people got from A to B or what the process is. And it just fascinates me. And the fact that you were such a good sport. And then when you were like about the Charlie's Angels, I told my sister, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to be great friends. And my sister's like, I can't wait to listen to the podcast. But I just, either one of us had the opportunity to just say, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this and not go any farther. But, I loved like the whole connection. I think it's great. And I'd love for you and Garrett to meet now. Like I want to say, I want to make that happen. And we even talked about maybe we do a podcast with the two of you, that I think would be really interesting. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the show today.
thank you for having me. Really appreciate being invited.
So, thank you for joining us today on the Sandy Adams Show. A huge thank you to our author, Kelly Garrett, for sharing her incredible journey and insights with us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can find more about Kelly's work and upcoming projects on her website and social media. We'll put all the links into the chat or into the show notes. And remember, support your local bookstores and libraries. They are the heart of our communities, and you can find so many new friends there and learn so much. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep creating, and keep making a difference. I'm Sandy Adams, and this has been The Sandy Adams Show.